Today, on my 2 cents, I want to discuss a statement that Judge Joe Brown said concerning Carmelo Anthony. Before he was sentenced, Judge Joe Brown said, and I quote, "I hope they wreck him." This is what Judge Joe Brown said concerning Carmelo Anthony. He said, "I hope they wreck him." Now, those of you who've been following the story, y'all know that he was found guilty by a jury not of his peers. There wasn't a single black person on that jury. There were three that the judge made sure he got off. So there was Hispanics, Asians, and Caucasians. So he didn't get a fair trial. They sentenced him 35 years with the possibility of parole after 17 years. And Judge Joe Brown, the clown, Judge Joe Brown, the clown, said before that happened, "I hope they wreck him." Now, there's a video on YouTube where you can watch why Judge Joe Brown said what he said. I'm not going to even play excerpts from it because I'm disgusted. And I have lost all respect for Judge Joe Brown. I am convinced 100% now that Judge Joe Brown is a clown. He's not a decent person, and he's not to be even taken seriously as a judge anymore because he voices his opinion about the Carmelo Anthony incident. And being a judge, he didn't even get all the facts. So if you watch the video, you'll see he's described what he claims happened. And those of you who have really been following this and looking into it, you'll see it was a whole lot more to it than what he said. He said that he was visiting another school and he was sitting somewhere where he wasn't supposed to be sitting to get out of the rain. And so the judge said he had no business being there. Then he said somebody asked him to leave, and Carmelo Anthony became fearful and pulled out a knife and stabbed Austin Metcalf. That's not what happened at all. And this is supposed to be a judge. He's supposed to find out everything involved in what really transpired. First of all, somebody invited him to come underneath that tent because he was in the rain. So yes, he did have some business being there because somebody said, "What you standing in the rain for, man? Come on over here and have a seat." Secondly, nobody asked him to leave. Austin Metcalf and his brother Hunter, and I think they said at least 4 others, came and started threatening him and telling him he had to go. Now, Austin Metcalf and Hunter Metcalf and the other children that were with him, none of them had the authority to come and tell this young black man that he had to move. He had to get out from under that tent. They did not own the tent. They were just members of the school, nor was it their job to enforce who sits under the tent. The judge doesn't deal with any of that. He doesn't talk about what Austin Metcalf did at all. Austin Metcalf and his brother Hunter were the antagonists. They were bullies. Now, what makes me lose all respect for Judge Joe Brown is he's supposed to be a judge and he's supposed to know the law. Well, in Texas, they have a law called the Stand Your Ground law. He didn't deal with that at all. He just dismissed Carmelo Anthony as a coward and painted him out to be some thug. And then he says that I hope they wreck him. And that don't sit well with me. And it doesn't sit well with a whole bunch of folks. I have lost all respect for Judge Joe Brown. He is a clown, in my opinion now. Let's deal with the stand your ground law in Texas, okay, which he should have dealt with if he was going to be fair. Texas has both a stand your ground law and a castle doctrine. These laws allow you to use reasonable force, including deadly force, in self-defense without a legal duty to retreat, provided you are in a place you have a legal right to be, did not provoke the attack, and are not engaged in criminal activity. Carmelo Anthony had a legal right to be there because he was from another school, but obviously his team was competing against the team at that school. So he had a legal right to be there. Then somebody under the tent saw him out in the rain and told him to come under the tent because there wasn't a tent for the opposing team. So he was invited to come underneath the tent. So he had a legal right to be there, okay? Then it says, did not provoke the attack. He did not provoke the attack. He was sitting there to just get out of the rain, having been invited to come and sit underneath that tent. And then Austin Metcalf and his brother Hunter and some others decided that they did not want this young black man sitting under the tent. So they were the aggressors. They came up to him and started threatening and telling him he had to leave. The stand your ground law says, again, it allows you to use reasonable force, including deadly force, in self-defense without a legal duty to retreat. He had absolutely no reason to retreat. Judge Joe Brown, being a judge, knows this, but he didn't mention this at all when he made the statement. You watch the video. He had no legal duty to retreat. Why? It says, provided you are in a place you have a legal right to be. He had a legal right to be there. His school was there competing against their team. And he was invited underneath the tent. Did not provoke the attack. He did not provoke the attack and are not engaged in criminal activity. Was not engaged in any criminal activity. Okay? It goes on to say key legal elements in Texas to legally justify the use of force in self-defense under the Texas Penalty Code. And then they got the number there. Several conditions must be met. Proportionality. Deadly force is only justified if you reasonably believe it is necessary to prevent imminent death, serious bodily injury, or specific violent crimes like aggravated kidnapping, sexual assault, or robbery. Then they got innocent party. You must have not provoked the attacker, and you cannot be engaged in criminal activity at the time of the confrontation. Okay? First of all, he was justified in using deadly force because two big football players in that scenario to pull out a knife and stab a person is reasonable. Austin Metcalf was 200 pounds, 6 feet tall, and his brother. This young black boy was 17 at the time. He was 140 pounds, about 5'7". It was reasonable to use deadly force because they could have very easily killed him. And so that I'm gonna be cool. I almost called him a name that I don't want to call him, but we're gonna deal with those names later because that's what a lot of people are saying. So when Judge Joe says, "I hope they wreck him," and then he tells his version of what happened, he leaves off the fact that this boy was outnumbered, outweighed, and he had every right to pull out that knife and get those bullies and thugs off of him. Now let's go back and read the second part about the stand your ground law. Okay, here's some more key elements in Texas to legally justify the use of force in self-defense under the Texas Penal Code. Here's some more conditions that must be met. No duty to retreat. You are not legally required to flee or try to escape before defending yourself in a dangerous situation. He didn't have to go anywhere. He was legally, had a legal right to be there because his school was visiting their school. And then he had a legal right to be underneath the tent because some decent folk or one decent person said, come out of the rain and come underneath the tent. Okay? Then they got reasonable and imminent threat. These are conditions that have to be met. You must have a genuine, reasonable belief that force is immediately necessary to protect yourself against another person's unlawful use of force. Now, what Judge Joe Brown, the clown, didn't mention is that Austin Metcalf literally put his hands on Carmelo Anthony. That's assault. He grabbed him. And so once he did that, seeing this big football player and his other brother and the others, he did what he had to do to protect himself. He stabbed him. He didn't deal with none of that. He called him a coward, and he says anybody taking sides with him is a coward. So he called me a coward too. Well, a lot of people have chimed in on Judge Joe Brown and his bold statement. I hope they wreck him, he said. I hope they wreck him. In other words, I hope they destroy his life. I hope he gets the worst he could possibly get. This is what Judge Joe Brown said. And you know, I watched a YouTuber called the Professor of Black Truth. And he helped me come to the conclusion that Judge Joe Brown is a clown. Okay, that's the nice word that YouTube will let me get away with, but there's some other words that he's being called. When Daniel Penny grabbed a mentally disturbed black man on a train who wasn't attacking anybody from the back, like the coward that he is, and choked him to death, Professor of Black Truth said that Judge Joe Brown was hailing him as a hero, lauding him for what he had done. But when this young black boy uses a knife to keep them from doing him bodily harm, he gets slapped the label of coward. And Joe Brown says in the video that you don't bring a knife to a fist fight. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. That one has already put his hands on you, and they mean to do you bodily harm, and you're going to just try to fight them with your fists. No, 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 no. In that situation, you do whatever you got to do to survive. I am so disappointed in Judge Joe Brown. And so I felt led to throw in my 2 cents on Judge Joe Brown. Professor of Black Truth and others have made some bold statements about Judge Joe Brown, and I agree with them wholeheartedly. They've used derogatory terms, but I think the shoe fits in this instance. They called him an Uncle Tom, house Negro, and a coon. Now, let's do a little research on those words. First of all, what is an Uncle Tom? Let's deal with that one first. An Uncle Tom is a derogatory term used primarily in the Black community to describe a Black person who is perceived as overly subservient to white people, who betrays his own racial group by eagerly accepting white cultural values and participating in their own oppression. That glove fits Judge Joe Brown's hand perfectly. So yes, he is an Uncle Tom. Okay? They also say he's a house Negro. Now, I'm going to say Negro, but you know what they really say. I'm going to say house Negro for the sake of YouTube. I don't even think they like that term, but you know the other N word they use. What is a house Negro? Historically, the term referred to enslaved Black Americans who worked as domestic servants in a master's house, compared to those who did manual labor in the fields. In modern contexts, it is a highly offensive, derogatory slur used to criticize a Black person perceived to be subservient to or overly allied with white or systematic power at the expense of their own community. And that glove fits Judge Joe Brown's other hand perfectly. So yes, he is an Uncle Tom and a house N-word. Oh, yes, he is. And I hope he sees this video, because somebody needs to call you out. You know, you're ridiculous. You're an embarrassment to Black people everywhere. And I am done. I am so done with you. You call yourself a judge and you're going to tell us what the law says. But when it comes to Carmelo Anthony, you don't deal with the law at all. You call him a coward. You say all these things that were not true. And I never really paid a lot of attention to you. So I thank the professor of Black Truth for pointing out to me that you are Uncle Tom, a house Negro, and another derogatory term they use is coon. So let's do that one, and then I think we're going to wrap this thing up. What's a coon? In modern day English, coon is an extremely derogatory term used to insult Black people. The term originated in the United States in the 18th century as a shortened form of raccoon, but was later popularized in the 19th century minstrel shows through the character Zip Coon. So this is something that white racist people created to insult Blacks. It says it is deeply rooted in racist characters that falsely portrayed Black people as lazy, buffoonish, or subhuman. Using this term as an insult is a severe racial offense. Now, I don't think Judge Joe Brown is lazy. I don't think he's subhuman. But what he did when he made that statement about Carmelo Anthony not dealing with the law, not dealing with the facts, is buffoonish. So I am so through with you. It's just sad that we have these kind of people in our race bringing us down. This is why we will never be respected by the masses of people, because there's so much self-hatred among our people. And Judge Joe Brown, I am so done with you. You, sir, are pathetic.